They think it's all over, but is it? The BBC is about to roll over, we think, to say to Gary Lineker, come back, all's forgiven. You can come back on Match of the Day, even though we know figures were up 500,000 without the silken-voiced tones of Gary Lineker.
So an agreement between the corporation and its highest-paid star could be as early as today, and it's predicted to include a review of the corporation's social media policy.
Well, GBNews presenter and former Cabinet Minister and illustrious Tory MP Jacob Rees-Mogg is in the studio with us. Jacob, tell me, the BBC are about to retreat. Quelle surprise?
Yes, you shouldn't be surprised by that. And I think the issue is about the BBC rather than about Gary Lineker's view. He's entitled to have any view that he wants. We are all in favour of freedom of speech and people being allowed to say things that we don't agree with, or we may even find offensive, and that's absolutely fine. He can say what he likes. The issue is that the BBC is the state broadcaster and that it's funded by a tax on televisions. If it weren't, then we wouldn't need to worry about its impartiality. And actually, if we changed the funding mechanism of the BBC, we could have a much freer media, as they do in the United States, where people are allowed to say what they think. And I think that would be much better, rather than this pretense that the BBC is impartial, which it isn't, and then having rows about particular...
So you're saying get rid of the licence fee, which we all have to pay if we watch TV, even people over 75 now?
I have long thought that the licence fee is a constraint on the BBC, that it stops it earning revenues by subscriptions on the iPlayer or by taking advertising, and it leads to a heavily regulated media based around what the BBC needs and what is needed for a state-funded channel. And so, yes, I'm saying the licence fee has passed its sell-by date. It needs to go.
Would you recommend that people cancel their there fees?
No, because people must obey the law. I'm not in favour of...
But cancel their licence fee and not watch the BBC?
Yeah. There are so many different ways of watching recorded programmes now that you don't invariably need a licence fee. I certainly wouldn't pay a licence fee if you don't need it and you don't need...
But if you've got a television, you have to pay the licence fee.
No, not anymore.
But how do you prove you're never watching the BBC?
You don't have to. The onus of proof is always on the prosecution. Okay. You're innocent until proved guilty. You can't watch live television on a television, if I understand it correctly, and you can't use an iPlayer without a licence. Yeah. But I think if you watch YouTube and watch programmes that have been pre-recorded and aren't BBC ones, you don't need a licence.
And you can watch GBNews without a licence fee, of course. I have several friends who've cancelled their licence fee in the last few years. And I think people will do this. Do you watch the BBC on conventional television?
Sometimes, yes.
Right. And doesn't infuriate
you? But not inevitably as much as I did when I was a child, when you only had 4 channels. Actually, when I was a little child, you only had 3 channels. And it's so... I might watch it much, much less, but I still watch things like Newsnight, so... I can't... I'm definitely going to need a licence.
Were they right to suspend Lineker or not?
I mean, I think Lineker's a distraction from the overall picture of the licence fee, and I think those of us broadly on the right have to be very, very careful about attacking people for freedom of speech. So I'm not fussed about what he says. I'm not fussed about his contract. I'm fussed about the fact that the BBC is not an impartial broadcaster, but is funded by all of us, and that's the fundamental issue.
Do you think he was suspended on Saturday night, as opposed to saying that he didn't want to turn up?
I think they said you can't do your show unless you make some form of apology or commitment not to make such outlandish statements.
But dare I say, why do we care?
Yes, you dare.
It's not as if it were Test match special.
Yeah,
I mean, if Jonathan Agnew was suspended, now that would be a scandal. Because if you lost a great man like a brilliant...
But he tweeted last week if he had said those things that Lineker said, he would have been suspended on the spot because he's not the household name.
Well, he should be.
Well, he is in the cricket world.
I'm absolutely shocked that Jonathan Agnew's not a household name.
But the question, like, do we care, I think is really pertinent, actually, and not just about whether cricket is more interesting than football. But, I mean, do people care in that, at the moment, people are struggling to pay their bills? Regardless of how you feel about illegal immigration, you can take a stand on this. What this story has become is this axis around which all these different issues can oscillate effectively. Those people who want to see safer routes for those who are seeking asylum now see Gary Lineker as the hero of their cause, because he is, as he said, I want to give a voice to the voiceless. But those people who do not want to see more safe routes for immigrants are saying that he is the devil and that he shouldn't be allowed to say this. So everybody's projecting onto this story, aren't they? The things that they feel strongly about.
Well, I don't think somebody as high profile as that should be allowed to use his profile in that way when he's paid £1.3 million. He is the embodiment of the BBC. People think Gary Lineker, they think BBC impartiality.
That I think is absolutely true. And although he had a very fine reputation when he was playing football, most of his reputation now is through the BBC. I think that's absolutely fair. And he's been presenting Match of the Day for 30 years. I think in the whole of that 30 years, I've never watched it.
Nor me.
That may not surprise you both. So I think you're right that his reputation is a BBC reputation. But I don't understand why he doesn't stand for Parliament.
I said exactly that last week.
He's got these strong views. He is highly articulate.
He'd struggle with the pay, I imagine, £84,000 a year as opposed to £1.3 million, which taxpayers pay him, and that's without all the other stuff he does.
Yes, but as I've discovered, you're allowed to be a TV presenter and a Member of Parliament, so he could carry on.
Yes. Who are you?
Well, I think he'd sleep at night, actually, because I think, or even if the BBC wants to carry on using him, give him some political documentaries. Let him have that voice if that's what he wants to do. Send him over to Calais, do something on this if you want to keep him on side and give him that voice. But I don't know. I don't know whether football... I don't believe that he's a loss to the world of football significantly, of football broadcasting. I don't know. Let us know what you think. GBNews at gbnews.uk.
It's regarding Tim Davie, the Director-General, this is going to look... Whichever way this is played, it looks like he's mishandled it, because he has.
Do you know, the two people I feel most sorry for in this world are the Director-General of the BBC and the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Thankless task.
Both of them have completely impossible jobs running organisations that do not want to be run. And I think both of them do as good a job as anybody possibly can. So I'm always reluctant to have a go at either of them, because... Would you take their job?
No.
Well, Tim Davie's an interesting character, isn't he? I mean, you might know him a bit. I know him a bit, and he was from a corporate background, and he was quite an unusual appointment to the BBC. Although he did stand as a Conservative MP, didn't he? Councillor.
Many years ago.
A Conservative councillor. But he's quite edgy. He doesn't like being pushed around. He doesn't like being told what to do, and also he won't want to feel that he's the person telling Gary Lineker what he can and can't say. Because I do think, even though the BBC is by no means impartial, I think Tim Davie is a believer in free speech.
Yes, I think he is, and I think he's been trying very hard to make the BBC more impartial, which is difficult because the BBC isn't party political. It just has a range of views that are sort of polite dinner party views that aren't held by most of the country outside Islington.
And talking of that, Stop the Boats Bill, the vote is tonight at 10 o'clock. Prime Minister is away in California. Odd timing to be away for such an important piece of legislation. It'll get a huge Tory majority. Labour will vote against it. Are you supporting it?
Oh, of course I am, yes. Actually, coming here, the taxi driver who brought me asked me if I was supporting it.
He'd have probably thrown you out if you said no.
And I said I was supporting it, and he went on to say he couldn't understand why there was all this fuss about Mr Lineker's view, because everyone he knew was supporting the bill and thought it was absolutely essential that we finally did something we'd been promising for a long time, but of course couldn't do whilst we were inside the European Union.
And what if the European judges take us on and say nay? Can we still say we'll deal with that, but we're going to enforce this rule and fight the judges afterwards?
Yes, we can. This is really straightforward. It's exactly what we did over prisoner voting rights.
That's right.
Is that the judges found against us in Strasbourg, but not, of course, our own domestic judges. And Strasbourg judgments do not have direct effect. It's not the European Court of Justice when we're in the EU. Parliament then has to follow what those judges say. If we refuse to do so, there is a discussion between us and the Court and the Council of Europe as to what is possible within the agreements that we have. And with prisoner voting rights, ultimately they really accepted that we could carry on doing what we'd done.
Yeah.
Do you think Suella Braverman is quite happy to have this attention on Gary Lineker as opposed to the detail of the bill and whether it has got any chance of being passed?
Oh, it will be passed. I mean, it will be passed through the House of Commons.
And House of Lords?
The House of Lords,
Well, the House of Lords will get upset, but ultimately, people versus the peers is not a great look when one of the major parties is threatening reform of the House of Lords. The House of Lords will back down in the end. If not, there's the Parliament Act, and that will bring it in before the next election.
This was a manifesto commitment to deal with it.
The Lords They hate Brexit, and they vote against anything to do with Brexit. It's got a lot of lawyers in the House of Lords who don't like anything that tramples on their fiefdom, but ultimately the Democratic House has to win.